When I was a small boy, I'd go to my friend's house, and outside his bedroom window you could see this dilapidated windmill. I always wondered to myself what had happened to it and what was going to happen to it. Anyway, in the late 80s, early 90s, Ashford Borough Council bought this and completely restored it. Today it is a working museum. So I went to see Brian Stamp, who is the miller of Willesborough Windmill, and he showed me around and told me a little bit about the histories. This is Little Histories.
Willesborugh Windmill was built in 1869 on the site of a lightning damaged mill. It ceased production in 1950 and was used for storage until it was eventually left to rot. Now the Willesborugh Windmill is a working museum and the only flour producing windmill in Kent. I met up with Brian Stamp and we started our tour at the top of the windmill, also known as the Cap.
Well, this is the cap of the mill, where all the main action takes place. Right, the big shaft that goes through there is the Windshaft. Okay.
Oh yes.
Yeah. On the outside is where the sweeps are, and that the big wheel is the brake wheel. It's about 10 foot in diameter, just over, and it's held on, locked on with the brake, which comes all the way around the outside of it, and that is controlled from outside the mill. So when the wind turns, that goes round and then turns this shaft and then drives the actual mill itself.
So when you have it operated, how often do you have to come up here to do any repair work or maintenance?
Usually it's oiled every time we use it, oiled and greased, for the simple reason is otherwise we're going to get wear on the bearings and that. Yeah. So every time we mill, we actually go up here and we have to grease the Windshaft and oil this end and make sure everything's okay. The curb, which is the bit that the cap actually sits on, is the iron ring all the way around the outside. The cap is actually literally sitting on top of it. The cap itself weighs about 7 tonnes. And then it's stabilised with the little wheels all around the outside, which are called trucker wheels, and that stops the cap from moving too far from one side to the other. And the cap actually turns automatically in the wind. Out the back of the mill is the fantail, and that drives through, and on the outside this ring around the outside are teeth and a worm drive, so when the wind changes direction, it actually moves the cap into the wind, so the sweep's always facing into the wind.
Makes you wonder how, weighing 7 tonnes, did they build it in situ or did they hoist it up and put it on top?
It would have been probably hoisted up and then put on top.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah,
and that was what, a couple of 100 years ago as well.
Yeah, well,
so we
1869 this mill was built.
Well, we didn't have big cranes in those days.
No, it would have probably been done with some kind of scaffolding and pulleys and probably horse-drawn power. About 10 horses or something, just lifting the whole thing up. Just hope they don't rear up.
The wheel here, is that fairly new, or is that the original?
As far as we can tell, before this mill was actually built in 1869, there was a previous mill on the site. We do know that mill was actually struck by lightning and pretty nigh destroyed, and the insurance company actually paid out because it didn't catch fire. It just blew it to bits. And the owners then got paid out on the insurance company a grand total of £70.
And that was a lot of money then.
£70 was enough money to build this mill.
So you think this was from the old mill?
That we think is from the original mill.
So what would you estimate how old that would be?
Early 1800s. We think the original mill was built round about 1806.
Right.
It's certainly not on the 1801 Ordnance Survey maps. There is no mill shown on the maps at all, and it would have been on a map if it was here. They were very particular about putting mills and that on.
I see you've got a lot of things for
the
lightning strips.
the lightning conductor, there's actually a spike at the top of the mill to pick up the lightning, and that comes down that strap, and then it actually uses the main upright shaft as a lightning conductor. Whereas before, when it got struck by lightning, the lightning actually went down the chain.
All right.
Because that goes all the way from the top to the bottom, and it welded all the links together. It was that powerful. They took it out as a steel bar. Right, well this is the bin floor. This is where we actually store all our grain. We actually unload it from the lorry in sacks at the bottom, and then it's hoisted up with the train through all the trapdoors, and then we store it here, and then when we're ready to mill, in the next room it goes down the chute, down to the stones, ready to be milled.
How heavy are these usually?
We bag them up into half hundredweight sacks. Otherwise they're a bit too heavy to start moving around. What we do is we actually, before we actually mill with it, it is actually all cleaned, and we've got a grain cleaner downstairs where we can actually get all the shucks and the husks and all the rubbish out of the wheat, because the combines aren't that good at getting all the rubbish out of it. So yeah, we will remove things like poppy seed and bits of twig and oak leaves and all sorts of things come out of it.
Originally, would they have done that? Or?
No, back in the old days the miller would have milled everything. Simply because it made the weight up.
Oh right, yeah.
So he would, because
more money.
Yeah, if he was taking all the bits of rubbish out of it, he could have put that in with the flour and ground it all up, and he would have made an extra bit because bulking the weight up. But obviously with us, we actually make sure it is clean as we possibly can. So all that goes through that the stones is grain, the wheat grain. Right, okay, and here this is where we actually send the grain either down to the cleaner, which is down through that trap hole there, or we send it down to the stones. We just keep this covered over for hygiene reasons, and it goes down through that hopper there, down through a canvas chute straight into the hopper on the stones. And that's basically all we can do up here, is just chuck it in the hole. The grain goes in where we've seen earlier, in the hopper upstairs, comes down the canvas chute into this hopper, and when this one is actually filled up, the weight of the grain actually pushes down on that canvas webbing, lifting that bell up. And when it actually runs out of grain, the canvas strap is actually released, and the bell comes down and hits the quant, and this is actually revolving at 108 RPM, which actually drives the stones, and because it's square, the bell goes backwards and forwards, and then we'll actually let the miller know that he needs to put some more grain in, otherwise we end up with a problem. The grain, once it's in there, falls down onto the shoe. The shoe, again, having a square shaft driving it, will rock backwards and forwards, and it will actually shape the grain into the eye of the stone, and then from there it gets taken out from the stone round to the outside edge and then drops down a chute, milled, ready for bagging.
You said about, you were telling me about, you told me about up here.
Oh yeah, you remembered. Yeah, you got the main drive wheel up there, which is on the upright shaft, which is the feed that actually comes down from the sweeps down through the mill, and the top gear there, which drives the quant, is called the stone nut. That is actually put into drive so that actually you can drive the two stones, or the runner stone, which is the top stone. The bed stone is stationary.
This is
right. This is a bed stone. In this mill we've actually got two types of stone. This is a French burr, and as you can see it's actually made up of different bits of stone all put together and then held in place with the steel band, and the top one will be exactly the same, with the pattern on it, and the top one is obviously the one that rotates. It rotates on top of that actually spins round, so it will go round and round. The other set of stones we've got, which are the two behind you, are actually Derbyshire peak stones. They are one solid stone, come from Derbyshire. Unfortunately now the quarry's closed, so you can't actually get them anymore. But these ones, like the others, if they need sharpening, they obviously wear. This is actually quite a very bad set at the moment. They've really worn down. They would actually use this tool here, and they would actually, with it being very sharp, the bloke would actually come along and literally chip it away until he got all the grooves and that back that he wanted, and it would take him roughly a day to do a stone. It's a long time, but this one's blunt because it's it would need to be extremely sharp, and he would normally have a boy with him, and every 5 minutes he'd go down and resharpen this, and then bring it back up. It's actually got two ends, so that once one end's gone he can then use the other end. And there are smaller pieces which actually will fit in here. You've got the main lands which run at one angle, and then you've got the stitching which actually goes in between it, which is the very small grooves, and that's the ones that actually do the last final cut of the grains of wheat, because they don't actually grind it as such. Everyone thinks they actually grind. They actually physically cut it. And they work on an action like a pair of scissors. And on the board we've got over here, I don't know if the camera can actually see that. This is just a model made up using perspex sheets, but showing basically the pattern that we've actually got on the two stones. And as it turns round, each one acts like a pair of scissors and keeps cutting and cutting and cutting. But there are thousands of cuts happening all the time, and it just cuts it up and keeps cutting it up. And when that's going around at 108 RPM, as you can probably appreciate, that's a lot of pair of scissors cutting grains of wheat. I wouldn't like to be in there, I'll tell you.
How often would you have to resharpen a stone?
Sharpening stones would probably have to happen at least once every year on a fully working mill, where they're milling basically all day, every day. But we only mill about once every 6 to 8 weeks, and so therefore we'll probably be anything between 7-10 years before we need to resharpen.
I take it you don't use this to sharpen it?
No, the modern day of doing it, the bill has actually gone out the window. That's actually known as the bill. The modern way of doing it is actually using the jig and an angle grinder. It's a lot easier.
Less time.
It does take a lot less time, yeah. But an angle grinder will actually make a better, flatter job of it. Because actually the stones actually have to be dead flat as well, and we've actually got a levelling bar that we use, and they put a special powder on it and then run it all the way over the stones and make sure that actually leave an imprint of the powder all over the mill, all over the stone, so that we can actually then check that they're level, and they both have to be absolutely dead level. You don't want any high spots in it.
No, you don't.
Right, okay, when the flour actually comes out of the stones, it comes down that chute there, and I've got a choice. I can either bring it down this side where we actually bulk bag it, or by flicking the lever over there, I can actually send it further downstairs without coming here, so they can bag it up downstairs. Now when we're actually running, we've got the shaft from the stone up there comes through, and it drives that set of pulleys.
Oh yeah.
There, that pulley and the counterweights on it, and they actually fly out, and they actually control the fine setting of the stone. So depending on the speed of the wind, it will actually either increase the gap or decrease the gap of the stones, and it will actually keep the grain, the flour level constant. So it will always be exactly the same size, because it's all done with due to the speed of the wind. And when we're actually milling, I can actually lower the stones down, and that's how I actually control the stones manually. I can drop them down, or I can raise them back up again, and that means I've actually got control over it as well, because I need to get it just right. When we're actually milling, when we actually get the flour out, you actually put a bit on your hand, and you rub it with your thumb, and you can actually feel how coarse the grain is, the flour is, and yeah, that's why they actually call it the rule of thumb. That's where the saying is supposed to come from. Whether or not,
as the urban myth is, where it was supposed to be, was it some judge said it was okay to hit a woman with a piece of wood if it wasn't thicker than your thumb.
Yeah, well, this is where they always say the rule of thumb was the millers, because there were so many millers in the country, and it was just the rule of thumb. And if it felt okay on between the thumb and the palm, it was okay. If it was too coarse, then you had to lower the stones a bit more and make it a bit finer. This is our grain cleaner, and what we do, we send the grain down from the hole in the floor up in the cap. Yeah. It comes down the chute. We can actually control the speed of it coming out of there, and then we've got two sieves in here. This rattles backwards and forwards, and then inside this bit there is actually a rotating, a conical drum with rotating brushes in it, and that actually brushes all the dirt and everything else off it as well. Some of it falls down there, then it goes through here and it's wind blown, and that gets any surplus dust and that off it, and then eventually the clean grain goes down through that chute there, down to the floor below where it is bagged up, and then can go back up the top. I'll give you an example of what it sounds like. I can actually start it up, and that's what it's like. You see the amount of dust coming from there.
Quite noisy, isn't it?
It is quite noisy, but yeah, if you can hear my voice, you're all right.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's noisy and dusty as well. But yeah, we get all the rubbish out of it, and as you can see, I've got a bucket down here, and this is out of the top sieve. That is all the sort of rubbish and that we get out of it, bits of twig and things like that. And we actually keep a little box here to show the kids when they come round the type of stuff we get out. And the first one is the grain that we actually get from the farmer, and that has all sorts of bits of straw and rubbish in it, and oak leaves and poppy seed and everything else. And then there's various stages of the cleaning where we take the chaff out, light chaff and that heavy chaff. All the small bits and the dust and the dirt, that's taken out on 2 separate sections, and then eventually we end up with clean grain. And then once we've milled it, that's what we end up with, is the flour. Very dusty. Right, this is the chain that we actually use for adjusting the shutters on the mill, and then round the corner here, if I grab hold of the rope, this is the rope that goes up to the cap. There's actually control to the
that's the rope you let down earlier, isn't it?
Yeah, this is the rope we dropped through earlier. This is the one that actually takes the brake off. So if I now pull on that, and it will click. That's it, that stayed there. So now the brake is off. Now by taking the weight off of there, because you can't pull the chain with that heavy weight on, I can now shut the shutters. And if I shut the shutters are shut and the mill is starting to turn. Right, on the mill, because there's 4 sweeps in pairs, one set is outside the mill and the other set are on the inner side of it. And what you don't want to do is actually walk in front of them, because they don't stop and you will end up going over the side or get severely injured. Each sweep weighs over a ton, so yeah, quite dangerous things. Right, we're going down now to what we call the Wally Eye floor. This is where we've got our bagging room. That area over there is where the kids play. And we've got a set of coiling stones there where the kids can actually make their own flour. I'll give you a demonstration on that in a minute. And then over there is our clean room, where we actually do all the bagging of the flour into 1.5 kilo bags. This is the bagging room. It's a clean room. When we're actually working in here, it's white coats and hats. That's mine, green one, because of obviously cleanliness reasons. We actually bag into those bags, and when we actually bag it, each one has actually got a sell-by date stamped on it, and also on the back is a batch number. That is so that if anyone gets a problem with the flour, we can actually track it, and everything that we actually do is actually kept in a logbook. That's the sale of all the flour, which is all the commercial sold stuff that we do, so we know where it's gone, who's got it, how many bags and that they have. And then we've also got another logbook up here, which is the production log, and in this one are all the sheets which when we do all our testing actually have all the details of it, what the flour is that we're actually doing, what the make of the type of grain we're using, when we've done it, how much we've done, and all the checks that we actually do on it, because we actually sieve it and check for bugs and creepy crawlies and that, and so far we have never found anything.
I thought that's useful.
So,
yeah.
But there is also, yeah, because of the log, we can actually then, if someone gets a problem, there's a batch number on there, we can check back at the batch, and we know if we had any problems. If there are any problems, it would actually be written on the log anyway. So that's basically that bit. Anything else we want?
I've got this thing here.
Yeah, that's right. When we're actually bagging flour, if we want to send it down straight into here for them to bag, what we would actually do is have the bag ready. The bag then goes underneath there, and then by opening the first slide, you will then, all the flour will drop down into this hopper, and then that fills up. You then shut that one, and then you open this one, and the flour will then actually come out of there.
Some in there already, wasn't there?
Yeah, come out of there into the bag, and that will be nearly 1.5 kilos. Once we've actually done that, it is then set on a set of scales, which we have here, which are calibrated, and it will be weighed and topped up accordingly to 1.5 kilos. And then we just seal it up, and then eventually it's stored in the cupboard until we need it.
Cool.
Actually, I can show you which cupboard it's got some in. This one's got, and there is a completed bag of flour. So by date is the 31st December this year, and this one was batch number 2015 0045, so it's this year's batch, and it's the 45th time we've actually milled flour. This is our little kids corner, where the kids from the school parties and that can have a go at making their own flour. And what we actually do, we get them to start off with usually whole grain, and they can put some in our little grinder here, and then when they turn the handle on it, it actually partly grinds it. So it actually ends up half ground, and then from there they can actually then put it in the quernstones.
Hooked up there.
Hooked up. Yeah, they put it in the quernstones, and then they actually start turning it. And then what we get out of the stones is the flour. So if we sweep round the outside of it, we end up with some flour, and pick it up and put it in there. It's very coarse at the moment, but what we actually do is we get the sieve and that, and if we actually sieve it, well, we can do that. What's left over, that is bran, and that's the stuff you have with your cereals and that. And then in this one is the flour, and that's pretty nice, same as what we would actually get out of our stones, maybe just a little bit coarser. But obviously these are used all over the world, in Eastern European countries and that, Africa and places like that, and they use them all the time. That's how they make their bread. There's a lot of hard work because you need to turn that probably for about an hour to get enough flour to make one loaf.
Wow, you end up with something like all this.
Yeah, probably. At the moment these are actually set quite light. The gap between them is actually quite big.
Yeah.
But obviously if you're doing it and you want real good flour, you would have that the gap closed up a bit more, and they would be harder to turn. There's a little adjuster in there that you can actually turn to lower the stones down. So now they're right tight together, and you can hear the stones actually rubbing, but the flour that comes out will actually be a lot finer, so you actually get more flour out of it than bran. I better reset that back up a little bit, otherwise they're going to moan at me.
Yeah, the children
That's
won't be
better.
able to move it.
Yeah, that's it. You get them, then they literally can't move it. It's too heavy. It's the same with that one. That's adjustable as well. So, yeah, once they've actually got their little sample of flour, we'll put it over there. We then get a bag and we give them a little sample of flour in there that they can take home with them, and they can say to their mummy, I made that flour. And we also give them the miller certificate, which actually has got their name on it and the date, and someone signs it, and they can take that home and show it off to their school friends and that, and yeah, they get a real good thrill out of that. They've got something they can take away. The only thing is we tell them not to use the flour for cooking, for eating and that. They can make biscuits with it and then feed them to the birds. But because of the situation it's in, it's not hygiene clean in here, it's not hygienic. So, I mean, that flour's been fingered by all the little kiddies and they've been wiping it around. So definitely I wouldn't like to make anything out of that and eat it. Right, this is our engine room, and this is where we actually have our engine, which is our auxiliary engine, which will actually drive the mill when we haven't got any wind. If we need to mill, then we can fire this up and actually use this power. It's a 1906 Ormsby gas oil engine, runs on paraffin. It takes about 15 minutes to actually get it heated up enough to start it, and we actually have to start it by hand by turning the flywheel. Originally in here there was a beam engine, hence the high room and the high windows. The beam would have been right up there somewhere with the engine sitting below it with vertical pistons on it, and the boiler for that engine is actually in the room next door, and that is still in situ. Unfortunately, it's beyond repair. It's an old Cornish boiler, and it's that old, it's got holes in it, so there's no way you'd ever be able to reuse the boiler, but we just keep it there because it was there. Now, this is the kitchen to the mill, very much as it would have been in Victorian times. With we've got the washing hanging up there, which would be normal. The old-fashioned crockery, bits and pieces. So the butter pats, because they would have made their own butter. Yeah. So that's how you'd make the butter. Got the old Victorian fireplace. Stuff the wood and the coal on there with the oven beside it. Plenty of irons when they're doing the ironing, because the iron went cold, so you had another one that was already warmed up. Yeah, and that's basically it, I think, in here. There's, I can't think of anything else.
So we've got the old mangle there.
Oh yeah, oh, that's got me on, yeah. Yeah, mangle, that was actually made by buglers in Ashford. Their foundry is where the Mecca Bingo is at the moment in High Street. Oh. And yeah, before that was, well, Mecca Bingo, before that was the Odeon Cinema, but previous to that was Buglers, and it was a very large building in its time. I think it was about 4 floors tall. So yeah. And these are the people that actually made the gates at Victoria Park and all the fencing. So it does actually still work, apart from the rollers are a bit worn out.
Yeah, I don't think you'd want to use that nowadays.
No, not without new rollers.
No.
It probably works better than a tumble dryer or spin dryer anyway, bringing out the washing. And now we come into the parlour, and this is where the family would have sat down and not watched television, because there wasn't television in Victorian times, but they may have sat down and listened to the radio. They would have read the local newspaper, and this is a copy of the Police Gazette in London, Wednesday the 26th of May 1897. So that's very old.
Yeah, it is quite old.
Yeah, it's
quite level then, listen to someone play on the piano.
Oh yes, they would have quite easily entertained themselves in the evening by someone playing the piano and singing their own songs, you know. And it's in tune. It does actually work. But unfortunately, I'm not a pianist, but I can make a bit of noise with it. But that's about it. And of course, we've got the old-fashioned Singer sewing machine.
Yeah. I've actually got one of those in my front room.
You have you? Yeah.
Yeah, and it still works.
This one still works, as far as I'm aware. That flips up, and then back down, and then they would have. This is a treadle one. Unfortunately, it hasn't got a belt on it, but treadle would have gone round and busy sewing away, darning socks or whatever they wanted to do. Well, I think that's anything else I can actually say in here.
I think that's about it for the tour,
Yeah, there would have been the clock on there, but they've taken that away to try and make it go continuously.
Battery run out.
Yeah.
Of course,
Obviously,
out there you've got the garden.
we've got that's the Victorian garden.
That's now, well, it's just a garden now. You don't think you'd have any.
No, that would have been all the veg and everything else out there in Victorian times.
But now there isn't. It's just, I think it's just flowers and stuff.
That's right. It's just a flower garden now, and we've got a couple of gardeners that come in. The volunteers that actually go out there every week and sort it out and hoe it and trim the little hedge out there, and they do a very good job of looking after it.